Can become your city as well.
Where do you begin when trying to summarize the entire history of BioShock, the revolutionary game of the year from 2007? Do you start way back in the infancy of AAA games when Kevin Levine was working on cult classic System Shock? Or perhaps it's best to begin at the New Year's Eve party within Rapture in 1958, where Andrew Ryan's hat would fall off and Rapture's suave and sophisticated society would lose their way in the crumbling Atlantis. Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film and Comics Explained. Would you kindly take a seat as we begin in Rapture, BioShock's atmospheric and bleak setting for Irrational Games' first installment of their magnum opus. Although Rapture would become one of the most beloved and awe-inspiring settings to ever feature in a video game, events were not initially meant to transpire under the sea at all. The game was always meant to be centered around genetic mutations gone wrong, while keeping a narrative that would try to replicate that of Ayn Rand's famous novel Atlas Shrugged. However, this was to take place on a desolate space station. This would have been an exciting concept and would of course have just pipped Dead Space by a year. However, this was not meant to be, and Rapture would crash into the Earth's atmosphere and plummet to the seabed. Ken Levine was the man to make this decision, along with a great deal of the creative directions that BioShock would take. Ultimately, Ken wanted this game to be a spiritual successor to the System Shock series in its mechanical style, while championing a narrative approach. One thing Ken aimed to do above all else was to challenge the player to think beyond the constructs that had been set by games that had come before BioShock. He wanted to take away the feeling of glee one would get when taking down an enemy and make the player question their actions. This would be done through the splices that would be a product of the crumbling environment they were trapped in. They were victims above all else, addicts that were simply making ends meet. So when you took one down, endorphins didn't rush to your brain, it was instead pity, remorse, or guilt. Then Ken aimed to represent social commentary such as the aforementioned Atlas Shrugged novel, and the need for a city made purely of the finest minds in the world. Artists, musicians, and scientists would make up the population of Rapture. Yet, in this sandbox of seemingly infinite possibilities, a man-made utopia, they would also come to the political instability of Ryan's ideals and fall to madness. You can see this love of the dystopian narrative, not just through the overall presentation of BioShock as a whole, but also through more subtle gestures. Take the reference to Fahrenheit 451 through the code to a safe. This is found in not just the original BioShock, but in all three iterations. Even the key characters themselves can be seen as references to the ideals of objectivism pushed by Ayn Rand in her iconic novel. These ideals include Dr. Steinman and his obsession with the pursuit of perfect physical beauty.
What's this, guys? An intruder! He is ugly! 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 Ugly!
And Sander Cohen's morbid obsession with death and art. These are great in moderation, and though these characters push each ideal to their extremes, the result only complements the unsettling horror atmosphere of Rapture as a whole.
It's beautiful.
The survival horror-heavy medical wing and Fort Frolic arguably offer the best segments within the entire game, and these characters are a massive contributing factor. Outside of these non-gaming references and inspirations, Ken would take inspiration from examples within the medium of gaming as well. He's been quoted touting Valve's Half-Life franchise as a massive inspiration on the BioShock series. He believed that they had a great approach through the lack of cutscenes present within the game, but still being able to deliver a captivating story. You can even see subtle nods to the Half-Life series within the first few minutes of the game when collecting your first weapon. Atlas will tell the player over the walkie-talkie to grab a crowbar or something. Of course, what you grab is a wrench, which has become iconic in its own right, but the crowbar was the iconic melee weapon of the Half-Life series. This is just a subtle way for Ken and the team to show some respect to a game that helped them forge their own. Music and sound would be handled by Gary Scheinman and would feature a score of violin concertos, ambient moments, and a city that was truly alive. Decisions were also made in this series that had seldom been seen in the industry but is now commonplace, such as licensing 1950s music that would play ominously throughout your playthrough, and the ambient noise that would feature in every area, be it the subtle moans of splices down the hall or the creaking of the city that was falling in on itself with every passing day. The player cannot escape the feeling that Rapture has a beating heart at its core. There is a natural feel to encounters and environments, and natural, immersive discovery is encouraged and sustained throughout the whole journey. This is done through environmental cues such as messages in blood on the walls of the medical pavilion, and smugglers being strung up at the fisheries. However, these are just appetizers for the main course, for the key to players piecing together the twists and turns of Rapture's past was through the use of audio logs.
The death penalty in Rapture. Council's in an uproar. Riots in the streets, they say. But this is the time for leadership. Action must be taken against the smugglers.
These would tell the stories of the most important residents close to the likes of Fontaine and Ryan. Each had a unique nugget of information that would explain the plot, the environment, or offer a window into the life of a former resident of the city. There would also be ghostly apparitions that would showcase moments in the past beautifully before the player's eyes. If the player simply didn't look for these logs, they would naturally find enough to understand the key aspects of the story, but those that wanted to know everything would be rewarded for their curiosity. Even the way the ghostly scenes are rationalized within this story is a microcosm of the brilliant writing within the title.
Oh, sugar, I'm spliced up in ways you never dreamed of.
Get over here.
Players would be able to see these ghosts due to the atom that is constantly swapping hosts throughout the city. So the atom that you have coursing through your veins was once coursing through the ethereal characters that you occasionally see acting out scenes from the past. Without this subtle bit of lore, the whole flashback mechanic would be an economical means of delivering exposition. However, it makes perfect sense within the narrative of BioShock. Players are constantly offered snippets and clues to the iconic moment within this game right from the very beginning. The most prominent of these is that no one other than Andrew Ryan could access the bathyspheres, meaning that only himself or someone with his genetic code could have made them work, hinting at the vital plot point to come in the first few minutes of the game. This was also true of the Vita chambers that would act as spawn points for the player. They were meant as machines that restored vigor to the residents of Rapture, yet they only resurrect you and only you. Seems odd, but as time rolls on within this bleak world, you begin to put the pieces together. Then, of course, there are the posters within Sander Cohen's sanctuary within Rapture, Fort Frolic. These posters showcased a show titled Patrick and Moira, which were of course the son and wife of Atlas, the mysterious figure guiding your way to Andrew Ryan. Those that sought these details would not go without reward, and this is what makes BioShock so expertly crafted and ahead of its time. This leap in quality from the games which preceded BioShock was also down to the incredible attention to detail, in spite of the limited resources at their disposal. In fact, so few were their resources that the developers could only afford to make 3 unique character models for the entire game, these being Andrew Ryan, Sander Cohen, and Frank Fontaine. Yet despite these financial hardships in development, this game made the most of what it had. Throwing away the blueprint of what a game should be and looking for what a game could be helped in this respect. The developers would also heighten design through alternative means. One example being getting a hold of mugshots from the California Police Department and modeling splices after mugshots from 1950s felons. They even used a lot of the guys on the payroll to do voiceover and sound bites for the game, such as Nate Wells, who would voice the protagonist Jack at the start and at the end of the game, as well as Ken himself, who would voice the Circus of Values Fender. It's clear that everyone was moving together on this project and wanted to lend a hand wherever possible. Music and score designer Gary Scheinman even stated on the Game Maker's Notebook podcast that he was only meant to produce 15 minutes of work for this game and simply kept adding to the project without the need for pay because he believed in the vision. Overall, BioShock is a game that aimed to challenge the player, to make them ask themselves questions as they proceeded through the hallowed and leaking halls of Rapture. The story wasn't pushed in your face, but rather wafted before scuttling away and urging you to follow it. The design was focused on the environment telling the story to you, a pawn in the giant chess game that is Rapture. BioShock is a love letter to those that view games as art. It's a political piece on the flaws of objectivism, it's an interactive tour of an underwater utopia, yet it is still a fun and mechanically sound video game above all else. It is the sum of its parts that culminates in a masterpiece that will never be replicated. With that being said, that's our retrospective look back at one of the greatest games of all time. I'm curious to hear how you rate BioShock. Has it stood the test of time? How would it do if it were released in 2020? What's your favourite thing about this title, or any of the others in the trilogy? Let us know in the comments, and if you want to see more content like this, would you kindly hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing? As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.